Hey, it's Richard Matthews with Matthews Wealth Management. I am going to be covering something I'm very excited about. Thomas Massie has introduced legislation, as I guess they should for every year from now on, to end the Federal Reserve. So this is the text. I'm going to go over it. It's only 3 pages, which is awesome. 8421 is the actual HR number it's been assigned. This was kind of what was put down there. It hasn't been signed because it hasn't been taken up yet. But let's cover some of the simple terms of how we would actually end the Fed. And then I'll wrap up by saying why this matters so much. But let's see. So we've got, in general, effective at the end of a 1-year period. So that's important, right? That we've got a time frame that it's not just tomorrow the Fed's over and everybody goes into chaos. This is a wind down that can be thought through. Beginning of the date of the enactment of this act, the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System and each Federal Reserve Bank are hereby abolished. Is everybody cheering? Because you should be, if they pass this especially. Repeal of the Federal Reserve Act, and that was what was set up. Creature from Jekyll Island, go look it up. But effective at the end of the 1-year period, beginning at the date of the enactment of this act, the Federal Reserve Act is hereby repealed. And that is super exciting, but it's very clear, very simple and straightforward. The stuff that has allowed this to continue for over 100 years and create a bunch of financial instability and steal from you, if you're middle class, would be gone. So in general, the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB is what we call that, shall liquidate all assets of the board and the Federal Reserve banks in an orderly manner so as to achieve an expeditious liquidation as may be practical while maximizing the return to the Treasury, right? So the assets would be leaving the Fed. And if you watch any of my videos, especially the M2 money supply and balance sheet that we cover by the Fed, it's $7.8 trillion of assets, which is basically treasuries as well as mortgage-backed securities. There are also some corporates in there because they're not the lender of last resort. They're the buyer of last resort for all the garbage debt out there, including what Congress creates. So anyway, all of that would be transferred back to the Treasury because if you recall, the Constitution says that it's the government that has the power to coin currency. Unfortunately, back in 1911, I believe, before 13, when the Fed was created, that was when they gave coining of the currency over to a bunch of private banks who obviously have your interest at heart. Very sarcastic. So let's see. This is getting towards the bottom of it. And I'm going to cut this up a little bit because as I've read this a few times, I think it's a little convoluted on purpose, and you'll know what I'm saying here in a second, but I'm going to read it the simple way. All outstanding liabilities of the Federal Reserve banks at the time such entities are abolished shall become the liability of the Secretary of the Treasury and shall be paid from amounts deposited in the general fund pursuant to paragraph 2, which are hereby appropriated for such purpose until all such liabilities are satisfied. So what is a liability of the Federal Reserve banks? Because the rest of all this stuff is getting into Board of Governors and retirement benefits and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, don't kick them to the curb because they really need that money. But this is saying, I believe, dollars, right? Those are liabilities that the Fed created out of thin air to purchase these treasuries in the first place. But this puts the actual currency back into the Treasury Department, right? And that's a little bit weird wording to say the Secretary of the Treasury, because it's not Janet Yellen who now owns this liability of paying you the value of your dollar, but, the Treasury Department. And so that's where all of this should have been in the first place so that the Treasury could manage how much money is in circulation instead of having these banks and fractional reserve banks create money out of thin air without any congressional or executive oversight. But that's how I'm reading this, is that the dollars then as liabilities transfer over to the Treasury, as well as the assets of the bonds themselves, which is interesting because they issue the bonds and they buy the bonds. And so that takes away a lot of the ability for Congress to do a lot of deficit spending like they're doing, because you would have the Treasury issuing assets and debt at the same time. It'd be a whole lot easier to audit a public government situation that we cannot do with private banks through the Federal Reserve. So, yeah, the gist of how all of this works and why I'm so concerned about the Fed being the predator that it is that it does create money out of thin air to purchase bonds or treasuries specifically. They also do secondary market with mortgages that allows Congress to spend, and that turns into inflation, and that makes all of our prices go up. It's a tax that we shouldn't have to pay, and it's something that most of y'all don't notice or pay attention to. So this makes it much more straightforward to hold government accountable. This is the end, just by the way. They have to write a report. That's the end of it. 3 pages, super simple. This was created back in the early 1900s, and from then on, it was supposed to stabilize the economy. We've never had the roller coaster before 1911 that we've lived under in the last 110 years. So anyway, call your rep, make sure that your rep is voting for this, getting this to the floor, making people put their names on yay or nay, and vote people out who say nay, and your life will get a whole lot better. So that's all I got. We'll see you next time.